All right. I think, while I'm making the introductions, I think people will join then. So I'm going to kick off by saying that yesterday was International Day for People with Disabilities. And so the MRC is observing it today, just a day later. And it is entirely appropriate that we devote energy and resources to observing this day and the actions that we've associated with it at the MRC. One of the reasons for that is that children with disabilities are four times more likely than others to experience violence. And in South Africa, people with disabilities have a lifespan that's more than 20 years shorter than people without disabilities. So clearly, there are major challenges and there is much work to be done. And one of the many activities that we have is this presentation, which has so kindly and beautifully been organized by our Deputy Director in the Mastru unit, Dr. Jason Bankies. And I'm now going to hand over to him immediately to introduce our speakers and say a few words. Jason, thank you very, very much once again, and over to you.
Angie, thanks very much. Good morning, colleagues. So I suppose it's midday, colleagues. I just want to start off by apologizing for not putting my camera on. I'm currently out of the country and I'm sitting somewhere where the internet reception is not very stable. So to save bandwidth, I'm just going to keep my camera off. I don't want to take too much of Wayne's time, but I do want to just say a few words of introduction to a friend and colleague, Professor Wayne Derman. Wayne Derman is many things, not least of which a father, a sports physician. He's the executive head of the Department of Sport, Exercise and Lifestyle Medicine at Stellenbosch University and head of the Institute of Sport and Exercise Medicine. He's a respected physician, a sought after physician. He's been the team doctor to, among other things, the Olympic team and more recently the Paralympic team. Wayne is a serious scholar who's also devoted much of his attention to disability activism and to disability research. Wayne, it's a great pleasure to welcome you to the MRC virtually and to
Thanks, Jason. Thank you very, very much for the introduction. And I see you've muted yourself, Jason. We lost you at the end there. So I also can't see the room in my view. So I'm just going to ask for somebody to give me the go-ahead that you can see me and you can hear me and I can start my presentation.
Wayne, we can see you and we can hear you clearly. So please do go ahead.
Good, and please interrupt me if any of that is lost or that we lose the connection. Although I'm around the corner from you, I'm at Tygerberg at the moment. Sometimes the internet, particularly during times of load shedding, is not as good as we'd like here. Good, Sanji, thank you very, very much. And thank you to Jason and Leslie for inviting me to really come share some of my thoughts about this topic. And it's a topic I'm so passionate about, so it's very easy for me to speak about it. So I've called my presentation What They Don't Teach You in Medical School About Disability. And the answer to that, I mean, I could say, listen, when I did medicine, I wasn't taught about anything to do with disability. So I'm going to actually, say goodbye and thank you. But I then had a wonderful opportunity, and that was being changed from being the Olympic team physician for Sydney and Athens for South Africa, which was a time span of about 10 years that I was Chief Medical Officer of the South African Olympic team. And I was then allocated to the Paralympic team. And that is when, as a physician and a clinician, I started learning about disability. And then I started really learning about life as well. And I'm going to share some of these lessons with you today over the course of the next 30 to 40 minutes. So let me start here and really speak about the Paralympic Games. I knew absolutely nothing about it when I started. I was quick to find out that it's got a very short history. It dates back to 1944, when a physician from Germany came over to stroke mandible. His name was Ludwig Guttmann, and he was a neurologist that really started looking at rehabilitation and sport as a form of rehabilitation for a group of people, particularly in spinal cord injury. And he started off with 16 athletes that he called together for the Stoke Mandeville Games. And that really is the kind of history of where the Paralympic movement started. Of course, they didn't call it the Paralympic movement there, but have a look from 1944 to 1960. There is a big growth in that many countries started becoming involved in sport for people with disabilities. And in 1960, the first Paralympic Games with 400 athletes in 8 sports took place then. And that grew and grew exponentially to 2012, where you had 4,237 athletes competing in 20 sports. And it's stabilized somewhat. So now the last Summer Games was the Tokyo Paralympic Games, where you had nearly 4,500 athletes. We had a good increase in the number of female athletes, and we were able to look at new sports like badminton and taekwondo. And these days there are about going to be looking at new sports for Paris, and we are thinking about 24 sports in the growth for Paris. And next year is a Paralympic year. So all eyes, and I really hope to whet your appetite today. So the thing that got me about the Paralympic Games is that the focus was shifted in this group of athletes from disability to ability. And if you look at that comment there, tilt at 46 degrees, you're a hero. Tilt at 47 and it's game over, speaks to that very high performance. The vision is to enable Paralympic athletes to achieve sporting excellence and inspire and excite the world. So that's really interesting as well, in that this was my framework of how I learned about disability. It was through this very narrow vision of elite athleticism. And that has got some good features to it and some not so good. And we're going to be unpacking that as I go on. But the values of the Paralympic Games are courage, determination, inspiration, and equality. And certainly for me, I found them incredibly inspirational. And again, some of these we are going to unpack, like, for example, the Paralympic value of equality, and question if the Paralympic movement is achieving that today. So let's get on to the life lessons and the lessons and the things that I learned about disability that medical school had to teach me. So the first was this concept, I don't know where I got it from, that disability has nothing to do with me. And if you have a look at the data are quite substantial, that disability impacts absolutely every one of us. We know that We the 15 is this big movement that actually brings an educational message that 15% of the world's population have some form of disability. It's even higher in some areas. For example, in the United States, it's thought to be 22. And there are areas where we actually don't know that number, that we actually think that the percentage is even higher. But what we do know is that it's not a good medical situation, that if we accept that it's 1 in 7 and that there are over 1 billion people globally that experience disability, we know that the knock-on effects to the individuals and their family is quite substantial, that they're twice more likely to find healthcare providers inadequate, 3 times more likely to be denied healthcare, 4 times more likely to be treated badly in the healthcare system. Half of these people can't afford healthcare, and more than 50% are likely to suffer catastrophic health experiences. This really puts in our face the actual problem and the challenges that we have of dealing with disability. And I wasn't prepared to, in our healthcare training, to undertake any of this. And I had to really take this wake-up call that I got through the Paralympic Games and start to understand a little bit more about individuals who have a form of disability and what that means for their healthcare. Now, in lifestyle medicine, we're dealing with risk factors. And the risk factors for the chronic non-communicable diseases are quite substantial. So if one has a look at the far right on this data table, if you do not have a disability, you're 24% likely to be obese, 16.7% are likely to smoke, 26.3% are likely to have hypertension or high blood pressure, and 24% likely to be inactive. But just look at the double whammy if you have a disability. Obesity prevalence goes up to 38%, smoking prevalence up to 30%, high blood pressure up to 42%, and physical inactivity up to a whopping 36%. So again, this just illustrates the type of challenge. So I think what really attracted me to this area is that sport is a way of mitigating against all of those risk factors for chronic disease as we get older. The bottom line here, which I was never taught in medical school, is that sport is good. We should all do it. And leading on from that, instead of sport, because some people think that that's competitive sport, and you might, from looking at my slides, think it, well, then let's extrapolate that to physical activity. Physical activity is good. It mitigates all the risk factors, and we should all be doing it. And this is the message that at least myself and my colleagues are trying to introduce into the medical school curriculum, is to emphasize physical activity as a major, very important feature that should be taught to all doctors, all healthcare providers, to pass that message on to their environment. So the second important factor that I wanted to share with you, or life lessons, is that one should not stay within a comfort zone. True growth can only come from a place of relative discomfort. And to explain this, I am going to show you this picture. And this picture is really special for me because it shows me when I took my place in the Paralympic team. I really didn't want to go to the Paralympic Games. I thought they'd make a typographical mistake on my appointment letter. I was meant to be the big and important Olympic doctor. And I said, the Paralympic Games must be crazy. I said, I'm a doctor for the elite sports persons of South Africa. And the person on the other end of the phone said, no, there's no typographical error. If you want to represent your country, going to the Paralympic Games. And reluctantly, I went. A friend of mine who was also a physician convinced me that I would learn a lot, and learn a lot I did. I'm in this picture. It was midday in China in the heat, dressed in a South African flag. And I actually thought to myself, oh boy, I don't know how to deal with this group of athletes. There's a guy in front of me who's in a wheelchair. There's somebody next to me who hasn't got an arm, somebody next to me who hasn't got a leg, and the person behind me can't see. How on earth am I going to be a doctor for all of these individuals? So I learned, I think, looking back on this, that one must be more like Jim Carrey in Yes Man and actually say yes more than one says no. I'm really happy that I did go and learn a little bit about disability through participating in this fantastic event. And this became really the area of my life that I've chosen to focus as a special area of research. And I'll show you some of the research work that we're doing. It also gave me the opportunity of having these wonderful South African athletes in my life and look after them for a period of another 10 years and take them through their various cycles in their performances for South Africa. And this is a group of multi-medal winners that I had the pleasure of looking after in Stellenbosch down the road. The third life lesson is that true excellence in sport revolves around pushing the envelope, irrespective of what that envelope or boundary looks like. So it brings us to answer this question: who is the Paralympic and the Olympic athlete, and are they different? And I had to learn this actually by participating in these games, because you see, if I bring up the quintessential Olympic athlete, Usain Bolt here, and then look at his performances, and now I bring up Johnny Peacock and another athlete here, and you say, well, you know, Usain Bolt functions at the absolute limit of his envelope, and that is why he's a great athlete. And it took me a while to translate that into Johnny Peacock's performance and other athletes, be they athletes who use wheelchairs or athletes who use other adapted devices. But what I did realize is, my word, that these athletes are as elite as any of the Olympic athletes. And I show you this athlete here who's releasing a ball using a head device. That's called boccia. It's a type of bowls for individuals with high needs. So this would be, for example, somebody with a very significant cerebral palsy or other brain dysfunction. And what I'm going to draw your attention to is this graph here, which shows time on the x-axis and heart rate on the y-axis. And look at game 1, then a rest period, game 2 and game 3. This person who's only able to move their head is functioning at a heart rate of 180 beats per minute, sustained over a 3-hour period. And if that isn't a significant physiological load that an elite athlete has, then I don't know and can't explain it more to you. But this athlete who has cerebral palsy, who is using just his head to do his sport, is an elite athlete. Life lesson 4 is that the body follows the mind and not the other way around. And really what you think you can manifest. And that even really goes to our experiences of pain. And I introduce you to Anu Fourie. At the time of having this photo taken, he'd just lost his leg about 6 months prior to this. This was in Beijing, and you can see that he is having a really sad look on his face. He's also sitting next to his prosthetic leg, which he can't put on because he's got this bandage here. And what happened to Anu is that 3 days before his final, he was called to see him, saying, "Doc, I was going out of my my starting blocks, and something went in the back of my leg, and now I can't move my leg." And if you have a look at this publication and look at the picture or the figure that is shown, you'll see that arrow. That is Anu's injury, and that is a 3 by 2 centimeter muscle tear. And I couldn't believe what I was seeing, because with this tear, Anu was able to actually not only compete in his final, but narrowly miss out on a bronze medal with this injury that would send any of our Stormers rugby players home on the next plane. And I wrote this into the literature in a case report called Transcendence of Musculoskeletal Injury in Athletes with Disability During Major Competition. And over the last 10 years, I've now collected about 15 or 16 cases where athletes are able to override using their cerebral cortex, their pain mechanisms in order to actually go and participate in these events. This is another South African athlete, David Ruiz, who was able to, with the similar injury, go and jump into a silver medal position for South Africa. And this was the picture in 2008. And you can see a very young Anu Fourie and a much younger Wayne. And then this was in London many years later, a much older Anu Fourie and a much, much older Wayne. And Anu was able to really get his medal that he missed out on a couple of years later. So my fifth life lesson is that there's a gate for each and every one of us. And by the gate, I mean this particular gate here. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about this gate. And when I got back from the Paralympic Games, I took my wife for a nice weekend away to Spier Wine Estate. And we are runners and joggers. And we decided to go jogging early one evening as the sun was setting, and we jogged for about 5 kilometers on that path behind Spier. We're going to go back and get ready to go to the buffet, and all of a sudden the gate in front of us was closed. And I said to my wife, I can't believe it. Now look what's happened. They've closed the gate. And now we have to go all the way around. We're going to be late for the dinner. And you know what happens when we're late for the dinner? All the steak and the crayfish are going to be gone. And she looked at me and said to me, Wayne, not another word from you because I'm upset. You always moan too much because you don't look at your environment. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, just have a very good look at that gate. There's no barbed wire fence on either side of that gate. So, of course, my wife is right, and she is probably right 99.9% of the time. And I then walked around the gate and carried on. And of course, we were early for dinner. And then I thought about this overnight. And the next morning, I woke up to go and take a picture of this gate, because what I realize is that for each and every one of us in our lives, the gate comes down, and that gate closes when one has loss of one's health, loss of a loved one, loss of a relationship, loss of finances, things that don't go right in life. And the gate comes down and is closed, and the path ahead looks like it's blocked. And then you sit down and you spend time in front of that gate where you can feel down about things, and then that's perfectly appropriate. But what I have seen is that some of these Paralympic athletes, in fact, the majority, find a way around that gate to get back onto that path. And for many people, that is sport and participation in sport. And that was a learning that I had. So here's the chef de mission for South Africa, holding a torch that he ran with. He only has 1/2 an arm, but I spent over 4 weeks living with Peter and only had to help him on 2 occasions. One is closing his suitcase, which was closed by a zip mechanism, and secondly, cutting a very, very tough piece of steak. But absolutely everything else he does for himself. So when it's his chance to sign the wall as the chef de mission of South Africa, then he does that using his stump and his mouth. And when he's got to take a picture or wants to take some photographs, then he has a soft depress with his tongue to focus the camera, and then a hard depress with his teeth. And look at this young man here who is standing with Bafana Shilali, who's the South African team physiotherapist. When he's able to change into a full costume with using no help other than a colleague of his who's also lost 2 arms, in a process that looks like a ballet where they help each other with their feet change into their full piece costumes. And here's an athlete who is filming using his iPhone, and he's filming with that iPhone, pressing the buttons with his big toes. it always amazes me, this picture, because if you have a look at his ears, he's got headphones on, and I often wonder, how do those headphones get into his ears? I really don't know. I haven't worked that one out. And here's some of our South African athletes boogie on down from their wheelchairs. But if you're going to party, then that's how you party. And if you look at Emily, who is lost her leg due to an osteosarcoma, and you look at her and think, well, you know, that's an asymmetrical body. And then you watch her use that body, and you can't say that that is not the most beautifully symmetrical photograph. And this is how she moves around the gate. And there's this athlete who can hit a target 50 meters away with the size of a 5 Rand coin, shooting only with one leg, no arms, and using his tongue and mouth to fire the arrow. But they're all able to move around that gate, adapt what it is that they're doing, and achieve excellence in performance. Right, so life lesson number 6 is do not see things at surface level and do not project our feelings onto others. And this was something that I had to learn. This wasn't an easy one. I wasn't taught this, but again, when I started off, it was a feeling of maybe a bit of a pity to the athletes that I was learning with. And it took me a while not to project what I was feeling onto athletes. And this is really espoused by, sorry, let me, this is Brandon Beek, and some of you might know Brandon. He's a Cape Townian who lost his ability to walk through a spinal cord injury. He was a provincial gymnast, and then he had a bad dismount and landed up with a spinal cord injury. And one can't help at some place in one's soul feeling sorry for Brandon, but that's actually the last thing that he wants. In fact, look at what he says about his accident. My accident, it's the best thing to have happened to me. It has made me the man that I am today. So over time, I've actually toughened to my stance and how I feel, and have normalized the kind of experience of meeting people who have some form of disability and interacting with them, so that there is not that pity at all anymore. But this is a really important thing that we as clinicians should learn as well. And this is never taught in medical school, about the normalization of society, to not to not recoil when one sees an individual with an impairment or with a disability, and actually normalize that. My life lesson number 6 is that laughter really is the best medicine, and that I have really seen very well with the Paralympic athletes. They have the most marvelous sense of humor and are able to laugh at themselves. I'll give you one example. This is a picture from the swimming in Rio. And if you want to go to the Paralympic Games as part of the entourage, you could go as a tapper. A tapper is somebody who has a long stick like this guy in the red shirt, and then there's a little polystyrene knob at the end. And what happens is that if there is somebody who has a visual impairment, like these athletes are visually impaired, when they come to the end of the lane, that person taps them on the head, and then they do a tumble turn against the wall. So that's how they know they're coming into the wall, and they can do their tumble turn. Funniest moment in the Rio Games happened in the 100 meters for the athletes who are totally blind. The race goes off, and what happens, as blind swimmers do sometimes, they swim skew. And in the middle of the pool, one of the athletes put their arm over the lane barriers and hit one of the other athletes on the head in the lane next door. And they thought it was their tapper, and they just did a tumble turn in the middle of the pool and obviously couldn't kick off the wall. So what happens is that they stopped the event. All the athletes got out of the pool. They explained that they had a jolly good old laugh and actually got on with what it is that they were doing and re-swam the whole event. That you would not find happening in the Olympic Games settling. And this self-deprecating sense of humor is really something special. I think when you're able to laugh at yourself, it takes your ego out of the way and you're truly able to engage with your competition in the highest order. Right, the last two life lessons. My life lesson was that a few people with the right energy and intention and some sneaky strategy can really make a difference. I introduce you to the, not the Starship Enterprise, but these are all the people who work with me on the medical committee of the International Paralympic Committee. And this has, as I said, has become an area of our research focus. Clearly, this is not the focus of this particular talk, but from an academic perspective, what we have been able to do is we've been able to document the epidemiology of the entire Paralympic Games, the new sports, to determine which sports are the most dangerous, which of the disabilities carry the highest medical risks in the sport setting. And we have then identified these high-risk sports, high-risk individuals, and are able to introduce mitigating circumstances into the games environment so that the games are now safer for the athletes. Why sneaky was that we used Olympic funding to actually fund all our Paralympic studies. So that's just a behind the scenes insight into that. Life lesson number 9 is that the gap that we have, and we're all too familiar about this gap in South Africa, which is between the rich and the poor, finds its way into affect Paralympic sport as well. And there are a few issues now that I'm going to speak about that are perhaps the downside or the darker underbelly of the Paralympic Games. And what I show you here is that this is what really high-end prostheses or high-end running blades look like. And athletes in developed countries, particularly North America and Europe, are able to afford adapted sport equipment that looks like this. And that's a harsh reality for some of us in developing countries. And how, this is a picture of prostheses in Angola. In Angola, you don't have custom-made prostheses that you actually go and find a prosthetic that would most likely fit you and try and fine-tune it from that. And this is related to sport as well. And this is why Jason and Leslie led some research after one of the world championships that showed that the medal correlation is totally linked to the GDP of a country. And so that value of equality is not true of Paralympic sport at the moment. And this is why that we are starting to research these kind of ways that we can make a difference. Phoebe Runciman from our department is looking at lower cost prosthetics, lower cost chairs, frame runners, all of these different types of tools that we can use in our environment, and perhaps start looking at getting those equal to the tools that the wealthier countries have. This is another athlete who has been racing for many years against Ernst van Dijk in South Africa. I show you this because look at, his name is Zanardi, this guy. He was a famous Formula One racing driver who lost his legs in an accident. Zanardi won the gold medal in London using this bike that was made by McLaren, and that weighed 7 kilograms or 8 kilograms. And Ernst van Dijk's bike that we have used to in South Africa weighs 3 times that amount. So you can't say that Zanardi and Ernst have the same opportunity as far as the equipment goes. And yet Ernst only lost out to him by a matter of split seconds in London and came back to beat Zanardi in Rio and I think in Tokyo as well. So it just shows that we are able to overcome that as well. My last life lesson is to embrace one's own disability. And I go back to how I started this talk and show you this picture. And really, it makes me reflect on the fact that those feelings that I had of this guy in front of me in the wheelchair and the guy in the back who couldn't see and the person who didn't have an arm, and me thinking, oh my word, I'm not going to have the wherewithal and the training to actually provide good medical care to this group, was really just about my own disability. And I thank this group of remarkable athletes for holding up a mirror for me to reflect off. And I understand disability a bit better today, thanks to them. I understand that, like kind of each and every one of us, wherever we're watching this talk and this lecture, are like, and all these athletes that I've been talking about, they're like one of these shoes, that we're all different. And that this concept of disability and ability are just two ends of a spectrum that we're all functioning on. So on the one side here is disability, and another side is really supreme ability. And that ability and disability is not only about physicality. So it's the physical, but it's also the mental, and it's the spiritual and emotional IQ or attributes that we have. And I've seen some world-class rugby players who, by their behavior, I've found to be totally disabled. And I have shown you some so-called people with disabilities today that are extremely abled. And what I also realize is that where we want to function on this continuum, sometimes is more often than not, is a choice. It's a choice of how we actually choose to be. So are times changing? Well, certainly they changed for me as a clinician. Certainly I was taught none of this when it came to medicine. And I'm really hopeful that today, certainly this talk and maybe a longer version of it is something that I do give to each young clinician in their first year of medicine, to talk about this and maybe start their curriculum with this, to say, listen, this has been my experience. I hope this can be the same for you. Don't recoil from patients who you see in your training who have a disability. Normalize that. Go and ask them how it came to be that they had this disability. Go and embrace that and actually share your experiences with them. And if sport can be a remarkable way of actually getting past that gate. So I think times are changing, and I think that the Paralympic Games has facilitated that. It has brought the concept of disability and sport into most people's living rooms. And I think it is having a good effect over time. Do I have any evidence? Well, I love to show this picture that when we were in London, there was a competition at a school to draw Mr. Perfect. And one of the kids, and this is a 6-year-old kid, drew Mr. Perfect here. He's drawn Anu Fourie, and he has said there, the arm, he is a runner. He is fast. He has a prosthetic leg. It says there must be a prosthetic leg, but he is cool. So not only is Anu for this kid Mr. Perfect, but he is also really cool, and his prosthetic leg is cool. And it really warmed my heart the other day to see this in the one of our newspapers. And this is a advert for Ackermans. And they have chosen to include various models in this, and a number of these models have got some form of impairment or disability. So there is a model who has got an amputation of the forearm, and another model who has a visual impairment or disability through albinism. And we're starting to learn at the IPC as well that perhaps the best role model is not Johnny Peacock, who is that elite sprinter, or the 3 times winner in the wheelchair marathon. But perhaps we need to hold up as a role model these athletes with boccia, the athletes who have more significant disabilities with higher needs, as the poster face of the Paralympic Games in the future. So all that remains for me to do is to really thank you for the time that you've spent listening to me today. I hope I've shared some of these insights that have been really, really meaningful for me, and I think a good way to celebrate World Disability Day yesterday. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to make a contribution. Thank you.
Wayne, as always, that was very inspiring and very informative. Thank you. So there will be an opportunity for people to ask questions and for a kind of more personal engagement after Leslie has responded. It falls on me now to introduce Professor Leslie Swartz to you. Professor Leslie Swartz is a clinical psychologist. He's a professor in the Department of Psychology at Stellenbosch University. He's an A-rated researcher who has served on many editorial boards, most recently as the founding editor of the African Journal of Disability, the editor-in-chief of the South African Journal of Science, and the very prestigious Scandinavian Journal of Disability. Leslie, it's a great pleasure to see you here today.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you very much, Jason, for inviting me. And thank you, Wayne. It's great to see you virtually. We've got to go to that restaurant again together. It's just such a pleasure and an honor to respond to Wayne, who has done a huge amount through your role as a scientist and a medical person to promote disability rights in our country, and who continues to do so. And I mean, I don't have to convince this audience what a entertaining and inclusive speaker Wayne is. And I think that part of how Wayne does this is through the combination of the scientific and the personal. And I think one of the key contributions that you always make, Wayne, and you've done this in both your inaugural lectures when you were at UCT, and now that you've seen the light and come to Stellenbosch, your openness to talking about a personal journey, that we all have things to learn, and how you have learned through a process. I think Wayne's given us a lot to talk about, and I don't want to take up time for discussion. I also want to thank Wayne for opening the world of Paralympic sport for me. I've got a lot more interested in sport and exercise in general through being interested in disability and then getting involved with. Wayne's an incredibly generous senior academic who really helps other people along. I think I'm also incredibly impressed that the MRC has chosen to have this meeting. I just want to make a couple of comments. Is that that in terms of health research today, and I'm not sure who's on this call, it would probably be completely unacceptable to do any kind of health research, epidemiology or whatever, without thinking about gender, without thinking about gender mainstreaming. And really what I want to ask people, regardless of the work that you're doing, it doesn't have to be about disability, but are questions about disability mainstreamed into what you are doing? And there's a lot of work being done about that. And disability often gets left out. So, and if I can give you an example, there was a fantastic series, which I'm sure many of you saw in The Lancet recently, on racism, xenophobia, discrimination, and health, including very good work from South Africa. And as part of the series, there was a very good piece on intersectionality, which is a sort of a buzzword for many of us in health research. There was a piece about intersectionality. The word disability was kind of mentioned, but in fact, all the examples that were used, including examples from South Africa, didn't talk about disability. So somehow it wouldn't be acceptable to think about intersectionality without thinking about race, without thinking about gender, without thinking about class, comedy without thinking about LGBTQI plus issues. These are all central to how we now think about epidemiology and health research. But somehow in The Lancet, you could kind of say, oh, disability is important, and then forget about it. We have to change that. And I also think that we have a particular vantage point from South Africa as researchers and scientists in the health field, which enables us to do that more. And this was really brought home to me. I'm part of a internationally funded project, which I know many of you are as well, which is in a whole lot of countries in the global north and South Africa. And we're about to do some work on a Delphi process. It's not important, but over this weekend, I was informed by people in the global north, although it involves people with disabilities, that we don't need to hear from people with disabilities themselves because they're not experts on how you design health systems. Now, the concept in disability studies, and it started to be used, and was used actually during Feeds Must Fall and Roads Must Fall, is nothing about us without us. That comes actually from disability studies. And I think because we are so aware of exclusion, of how people are discriminated against, of leaving people out, we have something to give the world in our research by showing, for example, what I always talk about in disability in Africa for me is about all the things that Wayne has mentioned, but it's also, and Wayne, you will have heard me saying this before, it's about the 3 T's. It's about toilets. To people, if you're concerned about sanitation in Africa and people's health in terms of sanitation, a lot of NGOs put in toilets that disabled people can't use. It's about transport. How are people able to move around? And we know that spatial issues are part of apartheid in general. It has particular meaning. If you think about, I'm in Cape Town, think about the taxis, apartheid spatial design. It's added on much more for people with disabilities, despite things that, I mean, City of Cape Town's doing some good things, but if you're a wheelchair, you try getting onto a taxi and not having to pay double and so on and so forth. And then there's the issue in health systems that we face in our country in particular, that's the issue of time. So I'm currently doing some work with people with psychosocial disability who are refugees from other African countries, and they get to the health system, which is overloaded. And what happens to them? I mean, it's understandable that this happens to them. Nobody can talk their language. So they get sent to the back of the queue to wait for later so that other people can be dealt with. And at the end of the day, these are people who are severely traumatized and are definitely diagnosed in terms of what we understand psychosocial disability or mental disorder to be. They're lucky if they get given Panados and sent home. There are so many challenges of, if you think about disability, it forces you to think about how our health systems are designed, who they're for, who we include, who we exclude, and including, just to come back to what Wayne started with, how we educate the next generation of health professionals. So thank you, Wayne, very much indeed. I wanted to leave 10 minutes for open discussion. We obviously have a lot more to talk about, but thanks very much. Thank you, Jason.
Jason, are you still with us?
I don't think so. He's having some connectivity issues on his side.
All right.
Yeah.
Then I just want to, well, let me just see if there are any questions on the chat. There are lovely comments. And there's stories, people sharing their personal stories, beautiful contributions from the individuals and the groups of people who have joined the presentation this morning. I'm not sure, can you both see the comments, Wayne and Leslie?
Yeah, I can.
Someone is asking, but this is a question for the MRC, is the MRC looking at increasing the research into morbidities rather than mortality data? This is an important aspect in influencing health funding for people with disabilities. I think there are lots of people, especially Jason, who is driving that within the MRC. Mallory Links talks about growing up with a paraplegic aunt and how it's opened her eyes to many issues for people in wheelchairs. And she echoes what you have said and what Leslie has also said about the responses that people with disabilities receive when they visit government facilities. Amy, yes. Yes, Amy is especially responding to your comment about not projecting one's own feelings about people with disabilities onto them. I think that was a really important point. Some more commendations for Wayne and Leslie. Then Samir Rahim is asking, how can we push the agenda of people with disabilities? There are so many gates in their way around accessibility, access to services, access to opportunities to participate, let alone excel in the form of sport or social activities. Parents are often just, engaging in the basic struggles to care for them. I wonder if either of you have a view or response on that one.
So, I mean, just from my side, I think that following on from what Leslie's saying, is the first is about inclusive research, so we actually know exactly what it is that we're dealing with and what the nature of our problems are. So I think from and I've got to see where I'm coming from, where we can make the best impact on this problem. And I think that the way we've chosen to do that is to really focus on inclusivity from as far as Africa goes. Leslie, I'm sure you're aware of our interactions in Africa that Phoebe is spearheading with the GAPS Africa project.
Yeah.
And I think that this is really important because we've realized that medicine is lacking, and good medical interventions for many people who have disabilities but want to actually do sport, and that intersection between them doing sport and their disability actually causes medical problems. And access to health services is a challenge. And one of the ways that we are looking at dealing with that is through telemedicine initiatives. So actually looking at consulting with athletes in different parts of Africa and other more poorly developed countries through what we can do remotely. So that's one way that that we've got. I know also Phoebe's work is really important with respect to other low-cost interventions or lower-cost prostheses, frame runners, wheelchairs that would actually overcome that barrier. Because to me, that is a really that's a hurdle that is a very significant one, is costs, about all the things that actually stand in one's way, and how a disability actually is a cost-intensive entity. Leslie, I don't know if you want to add something to that.
Yeah, no, I've been frantically looking at references to try and share them in the chat, but we can share them later. I have mentioned the United Nations Convention on Persons on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. I mean, I think the key thing in terms of disability definitions, and this follows on from Wayne, is that disability is not about bodily impairment. It is about the relationship between impairments and the environment. And there are multiple issues in the environment. There is the built environment. So, you know, if your building is not accessible, the classic one is if your building is not accessible, then a wheelchair user may not be able to get into their office because their stairs. It's about the built environment. It's about the way that roads. I was in Ghana last week and very struck by how difficult it is just to get around African cities. But many of these barriers, so disability is always about the relationship between the impairment and the environment, and particularly in low-income places, you know, obviously money plays a role, but at the heart of a lot of these barriers are attitudinal barriers, so that people are still, it's happening in our own university, people are still building buildings that not everybody can get into. Somebody said, how do you push the rights of people with disabilities? Well, every meeting that you go to, you should try and ascertain, can everybody get into this meeting, whether it's online, because there's a lot of digital exclusion, whether it's online or in person. Is there a toilet? You know, I mean, we had a major fight, for example, at Stellenbosch University, where, you know, we had all of these meetings about social inclusion in a building that people with disabilities couldn't get into. You know, fight about that. That is not okay. So a lot of things do depend on funds and money, but actually we've got to help people do the thinking first. And often, certainly in the field of disability and employment, it's pretty well established now that if you know, people say, oh, I can't employ people, it's too expensive. If you employ somebody with a disability, we now know that they are likely to perform better and to save you money in the long run, even if there are upfront costs, partly because of proving things, because of social exclusion. So we have to think about always the relation between the person and the environment. And the environment is both attitudinal, and the built environment, and the physical environment, and climate, and all of these things. Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Leslie. Samantha, is that you? Do you have a question?
If we've got time.
Yes, we do. Please go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you, Angie. My name's Samantha Willen. I work in the Gender and Health Unit, and I'm based at the MRC based in Durban. Wayne, thank you. Just the way you presented, and I think it's the fact that you come from your personal reflections, which it then leads to an awareness that is so incredibly powerful. Yeah, it's you need to be presenting this everywhere. So I need to just ask two things. And my one question is, obviously I'm horrified that the Paralympics still allows the class issues and the structural issues around one person can have a more sophisticated support mechanism that another can't afford. So my first question is there any movement to address that? And I understand the many complexities and the reason they would probably shut down the conversation, but is there a conversation to address that? And then my other question is around, and I suppose it's building on what Leslie's been talking about, around disability being about relationships and where we're positioned in society. And I'm very interested to understand and hear more about the women at the Paralympics and their experiences. And are their experiences different? And if so, how are they different? We know that their life experiences are different from the men's. Have you worked with them and how did you see that playing out?
Okay, so two interesting questions. Let me speak about the women first. So the really interesting thing is that the growth in women participation at the Paralympics is really been phenomenal. So much so that, and I don't know if I think Phoebe's part of the audience. She can maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's just under 50%. So I think that participation is really picked up over the last while. And the other interesting thing is that the Paralympic movement has really, it's a aware and awake environment. So
Okay.
they tend to be more aware of the inequalities and the gender issues and all the other intersectionality opportunities that Leslie has mentioned. So just by its nature, it's a more gentle, welcoming environment. Now, having said that, the first issue of the inequality is one that is profound. And it really equates to not only at games time, but how the people and the athletes have their support structures for them. So it goes down to, if you want to be an elite athlete, it's about how you live your life, what nutritional opportunities there are for you. And we can actually look at rules and regulations of the sport and say, well, you're not allowed to have something that is not openly available to all athletes, but that can be how we make the rules for running blades or wheelchairs, that kind of your differences have to actually be accounted for. You're not allowed a pair of shoes that, and I'm taking this whole debate from the Nike Superfly shoes that have been in debate recently, and the role that they've played in breaking the world record. You can't allow those shoes if only a select portion of the competition are able to buy those shoes. So that is overtly what one needs to do, that you have to standardize equipment, that there is a set, not minimum, but a maximum of what is allowed. But still, it gets to me that we'll see some athletes trying to do high jump in the rain at a world championships and they haven't got shoes. Or, you know, how, you know, what do you say to that athlete? They've qualified in their bare feet to be there. So you know, what do you do about that? But it's a much more profound thing. It's about the access to training facilities. It's about the access to coaching. It's about the access to medical care and nutrition while they are kind of in all the other times that they're not at the games that they are training. You know, you look at Paralympic athletes, many Paralympic athletes earn professionally, that they're able to be professional athletes. Does this happen in South Africa? No. Does it happen in all countries in South America and in Africa? It will happen in certain select spots in Europe and in North America. So inherently, these inequalities are at the heart of what it is that we're going to try and change over time.
Well,
Thank
it's both depressing and inspiring. Thank you.
Thanks for that question, Samantha. And unfortunately, we have to bring this really wonderful presentation to a conclusion now. Both Wayne and Leslie, from a personal perspective, the presentation and your response, Leslie, has really provoked a lot of thought for me and a lot of emotion, actually. You know, the personal accounts that you shared of the courage, determination, inspiration, they were just beautiful. And the way you presented the life lessons, which are life lessons for everyone. And so you both, I just want to acknowledge and commend you on how wonderful you are as advocates for change, and the way in which in your presentation you've really held up a mirror for all of us today. So thanks very much. You have been a highlight, or this presentation has been a highlight of all of our activities around International Day for People with Disabilities. And so I just want to thank you both very, very much. And I want to ask Jason. Jason, are you still with us? Are you? I wanted to give him the last words, but I know he is struggling in Brazil. So with that in mind, I also just want to say, oh, yes, please go ahead, Jason. I really wanted you to have the last word.
I was just going to say that the signal is terrible. The signal is terrible, but just to echo exactly what you said, Wayne, Leslie, thank you so much for being so willing. Colleagues, thank you for making yourselves available to engage with this issue and for being with us this morning. Hopefully this is another step in an ongoing conversation for us at the MRC.